have this Law Day seminar online. And also thank you to Justice Hearn, who was great, just fantastic in presenting this video. This is Law Day 2020. It was scheduled for April 24th, but because of this virus, we're now coming to you online at this seminar. And the presentation is on female equality and the 19th Amendment. As David stated, please be patient with us. This is our first time, and we're excited about this. 2 matters in order for you to receive credit. A, make sure that Kim Steele, our executive secretary, has your bar number. You can send her a private chat. If you're on your telephone, then just send her a message with your bar number, because we'll send in the names with the bar numbers to the commission on CLE. The second part of that to receive credit is to stay online throughout Justice Hearn's presentation, because Kim is checking names now. She's like a teacher, and she's gonna check names in the middle, and then she's gonna check names at the end. So thank you for being here, being with us on our Law Day celebration. Second, let me tell you a little bit about the history of Law Day. It's a fantastic celebration of our Constitution. In 1957, David Rhine was president of the American Bar Association, and he thought, well, we need something to celebrate here in America, our laws and the Constitution. And his dream was Law Day. So he kept working at it, and then in 1958, President Eisenhower declared Law Day USA. And he established this Law Day for us to celebrate and remember our heritage of liberty, justice, and equality. This is 1958. And all of you know, even if you weren't born then or alive then, that things were not equal in 1958 in the United States. Yet this goal is still there and started in 1957 with David Rhine. In 1961, Congress caught on and said, yes, it is important, liberty, justice, and equality. And in 1961, by joint resolution, May 1st was declared as Law Day. And as many of you know, it is also May Day, so it's easy to remember Law Day. Since 1961, local bars, state bars, the American bar, schools, and businesses have celebrated Law Day. Law Day has become Law Week in some jurisdictions, and it also has become Law Month. It's important that we remember our Constitution, that we remember our great laws that make this a great country. So we're celebrating our democracy, and then now I will introduce our great speaker. She is amazing. Justice Hearn is a great person. Her achievements are prodigious, and therefore my introduction will be short, because I will be spending a great deal of time talking about all of her achievements. She has been on the South Carolina Supreme Court since 2009. When Justice Hearn was elected to the Supreme Court by our legislature, she was only the second female to serve on the South Carolina Supreme Court in our court's history. Before that, she began her Juris Doctor, or began her law journey, at the University of South Carolina School of Law, go Gamecocks, where she graduated cum laude. She also earned her LLM from University of Virginia's graduate program for judges. Before serving as a trial attorney, Justice Hearn served as a law clerk for the legendary Supreme Court Justice, South Carolina Supreme Court Justice Bubba Ness. So she had some trials in which she went through right after law school. Justice Hearn was elected to the family court bench in 1986, and then she was elected to the South Carolina Court of Appeals in 1995. She was chief judge of the Court of Appeals for 10 years. Justice Hearn is a fighter for equality. She is amazing. She has been recognized for her work. Just a few acknowledgments of her work. The South Carolina Women Lawyers Association awarded her the Jean Galloway Bissell Award. It is one of the highest awards. The Coastal Carolina University gave her the Inspiring Women Award, and Governor Nikki Haley awarded her the Woman of Achievement Award. She is fabulous. I love her, and I give you my hero, the wonderful, the dynamic Justice Kay Hearn.
It's great to be with you today and to discuss a topic near and dear to my heart, equal rights for women. A big thank you to Deborah Gammons for inviting me to participate. And Deborah, I won't hold it against you that you asked me to do this knowing full well that I haven't been able to have my hair colored or cut in a month. But I love you anyway, I promise. The 19th Amendment to the Constitution was officially adopted on August 26, 1920. 53 years later, Congress designated the date of August 26th as Women's Equality Day. The joint resolution of Congress, which created Women's Equality Day, contains this rather startling acknowledgement in its preamble. Whereas the women of the United States have been treated as second-class citizens and have not been entitled the full rights and privileges, public or private, legal or institutional, which are available to the male citizens of the United States. And whereas the women of the United States have united to assure that these rights and privileges are available to all citizens equally, regardless of sex. It is at once stunning and depressing that over 50 years after passage of the 19th Amendment, Congress officially acknowledged that women's quest for equality under the law was still a work in progress. But when we remember that it took over 40 years to pass the 19th Amendment, perhaps it's not so difficult to understand why women are still fighting for true equality under the law. The 19th Amendment, drafted by Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, was first introduced in 1878. 41 years later, in 1919, Congress finally submitted the amendment to the states for ratification. Illinois, Wisconsin, and Michigan were the first states to ratify it, followed quickly by Kansas, New York, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Massachusetts. Texas was the first southern state to ratify it on June 28, 1919. And throughout the next several months, 35 of the 48 states followed suit. 36 were needed for final adoption. Tennessee agreed to call a special session in August of 1920 to consider ratification, and did indeed deliver the crucial 36th vote after the youngest member of the legislature, 24-year-old Harry Burns, changed his vote to yes after receiving a letter from his mother. "Dear son," Mrs. Burns wrote, "hurrah and vote for suffrage. Don't keep them in doubt. I noticed some of the speeches against were bitter. I have been watching to see how you stood, but have not noticed anything yet. Don't forget to be a good boy and help Mrs. Catt put the rat in ratification." It was signed, "Your Mother." The reference to Mrs. Catt was to Carrie Chapman Catt, who succeeded Susan B. Anthony as president of the National American Woman Suffrage Association and was instrumental in the final push to gain ratification. Burns's vote broke the tie which had ensued after much debate and argument. He later said that he changed his vote because his mother asked him to, and that he had always been taught that a good boy does what his mother asks of him. Amen to that. With Harry Burns' tie-breaking vote, the words "We the People" in the Declaration of Independence finally meant all the people, black, white, male, and female. It's worth noting that African American men had won the right to vote 50 years earlier with the passage of the 15th Amendment. Where was South Carolina in all of this, you might wonder? It was not our finest hour. South Carolina soundly rejected giving women the vote in 1919. But then we hadn't been too enthusiastic about giving the vote to African American men either. In fact, when the 19th Amendment was being debated in Congress, a U.S. senator from the Bishopville area of South Carolina railed against its passage, equating it to the 15th Amendment. He said this on the Senate floor: "Here is exactly the identical same amendment applied to the other half of the Negro race. The Southern man who votes for the Susan B. Anthony Amendment votes to ratify the 15th Amendment." With that kind of enlightened thinking, perhaps it's not altogether surprising that South Carolina did not ratify the 19th Amendment until 1969, nearly 50 years after its passage. Only 4 states dragged their feet on women's suffrage longer than we did: Georgia, Louisiana, North Carolina, and God bless Mississippi. An interesting postscript to South Carolina's ratification of the 19th Amendment is that although the bill was signed in 1969, the paperwork was allegedly lost for the next 10 years. And so the 19th Amendment was not officially ratified here until 1979. Wow. Despite this hard-fought achievement of women's right to vote through the 19th Amendment, another constitutional amendment providing true equality for women still remains unratified: the Equal Rights Amendment, or the ERA. This amendment, first introduced by equal rights activist Alice Paul in 1923, provided for the legal equality of the sexes and prohibited discrimination on the basis of sex. Specifically, this is what the ERA provides: equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or any state on account of sex. Very difficult to understand why those simple yet powerful words caused such a seismic reaction. More than 40 years later, feminists Betty Friedan and Gloria Steinem, under the leadership of U.S. Representative Bella Abzug of New York, won the requisite 2/3 vote from the U.S. House of Representatives in October 1971, gained the Senate's approval in March of 1972, and the amendment was sent to the states for ratification. Hawaii was the first state to ratify the ERA, and some 30 other states followed within a year. Nevertheless, a conservative backlash against feminism in the mid-1970s eroded support for the ERA, which sadly failed to achieve ratification by the requisite 38 states. It would have become the 27th Amendment to the Constitution. This month, an American television series, Mrs. America, starring Cate Blanchett, premieres to tell the story of the movement to ratify the ERA and the unexpected backlash that followed. Today, with the exception of the right to vote in the 19th Amendment, women's equality in America receives no explicit protection in the United States Constitution. The ERA would provide a clearer judicial standard for deciding sex discrimination cases, as well as a strong legal defense to the erosion of rights for women that have already been realized. Without the ERA, women regularly have to fight long, expensive, and difficult court battles in an effort to prove that their rights should be the same as men. Take, for example, the gender equality cases Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg argued as a lawyer, strikingly portrayed by Felicity Jones in the recent film On the Basis of Sex. Without the force of a constitutional amendment guaranteeing equality before the law, Ginsburg had only the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment to rely on. Although she was largely successful in those cases, the 14th Amendment has never been interpreted to grant equal rights on the basis of sex in a uniform and inclusive way, as the ERA would do. When Congress first passed the amendment in 1972, it set a deadline for obtaining the assent of 38 states to take effect. When that deadline, which was extended once to 1982, had passed, 35 states had ratified the amendment, but 5 of those had attempted to rescind their original ratification. The ERA seemed dead. 35 years passed. But then, in 2017, Nevada State Senator Pat Spearman persuaded the state legislature to ratify the amendment, which revived interest in the ERA across the country. Illinois followed suit in 2018. Here in South Carolina, Senator Tom Davis and Representative Gilda Cobb Hunter held a press conference in December of 2019 to argue in favor of ratifying the ERA. Earlier this year, an all-female Senate Judiciary Subcommittee unanimously voted to renew efforts to ratify the ERA in this state. In January of this year, Virginia became the 38th state to ratify the Equal Rights Amendment. However, even assuming that the deadline for ratification were extended, if the 5 states who wished to rescind their ratification were permitted to do so, the ERA would still fail, even with the addition of the 3 new states. This February, 100 years after women won the right to vote in the 19th Amendment, the U.S. House of Representatives voted to eliminate the 40-year-old deadline to ratify the ERA. However, the Senate has not followed suit, with Mitch McConnell stating publicly that he is not in favor of the amendment, and the Trump administration expressing its view that the time for ratification of the amendment has expired. The belated ratification by some states, combined with the attempt of others to rescind their original ratification, makes for a legal quagmire. Indeed, the best course might be to do as suggested by Justice Ginsburg and to start the ratification process all over again. Speaking to an audience celebrating the 100-year anniversary of the 19th Amendment, Ginsburg expressed concern about the validity of the ERA's post-deadline ratification process. "I would like to see a new beginning," she stated, and that may well be the best course of action. Regardless of the ultimate fate of the ERA, one important advancement in women's rights during the late 20th century has been the steady increase of women in the legal profession and the judiciary. To help illustrate how significant these gains have been, I want to take you back to Warren, PA, where I grew up, back to the 60s when I was in middle school. Of course, it wasn't even called middle school then. It was junior high. Girls were not told, as they are today, that they could do anything boys could do, although I was blessed to have parents who never doubted that for a moment and raised me to feel the same way. I've often thought if my parents, neither of whom had the opportunity to go to college, had told me I couldn't do something, like become a lawyer, for instance, my life might have turned out very differently. In junior high, at least in Pennsylvania, all the girls took home ec, whether they wanted to or not, and all the boys took something called shop. As a home ec student, I was, shall we say, challenged when it came to the sewing portion. Cooking is a passion of mine, but sewing has never been my gift. To add insult to injury, our sewing project in home ec was, what else? An apron. I kept messing up the hem of my apron, and my poor teacher would just shake her head and tell me to cut it off and start all over again. After whacking off the hem several times, I didn't have enough fabric left to finish my ill-fated apron. All the other girls in the class had an apron to display to their parents at the PTO meeting. And what did I have? I had a pot holder. I should have known then that I was destined to become a feminist. When I enrolled in Bethany College in West Virginia in 1968, I did the things freshman girls did back then. I became a cheerleader. I pledged a sorority. I learned to drink beer. So maybe things haven't changed quite so much after all. But during my sophomore year, something happened that changed the course of my life. I had been elected vice president of the Association of Women Students, an organization that was light on women's political issues, but heavy on planning campus social functions. As vice president, my main job was to select the theme for and to plan the spring carnival. I chose Roman Holiday, the name of an Audrey Hepburn film in the 50s, and we partied the night away in our togas, proving once again that West Virginia is both wild and wonderful. However, the next semester, a decidedly different opportunity came my way when the president of the Women's Students was unable to attend a conference on women in Washington, D.C., and I went in her place. When I arrived at the conference, someone pinned a button on me with the numerals 59 on it. I was stumped. What could it mean? Was I the 59th person to register? Was I supposed to sit at table 59? But it was neither of those. Instead, the purpose of the button, which each of the attendees wore throughout the conference, was to drive home the point that in 1971, the year Congress passed Women's Equality Day, women earned 59 cents for every dollar earned by men for the same work. Often when you're in the midst of a life-changing experience, you don't appreciate it. But that day, standing stupidly at the registration table with that button pinned to my blouse, I experienced a paradigm shift, and I knew it. My innate sense of justice kicked in on high alert. In all honesty, I never looked at the world in quite the same way again. Little did I realize at the time that the 59-cent figure only applied to white women. Then, as well as now, there was an even greater disparity when the income of women of color were considered. It wasn't long after that experience that I decided to go to law school, which was certainly not a common career choice for women in the early 70s. During my years at the University of South Carolina School of Law, there were no women judges in South Carolina, and none on the United States Supreme Court. Yet as the old Bob Dylan song goes, the times they were a-changing. My law school class was nearly 20% women. As the first lawyer in my family, I was just hoping to find a job when I graduated, and the notion of one day being a judge never entered my mind. However, looking back now, I can see that my personal journey to the bench really did begin in law school. One day in the early 70s, a small group of mostly male law students decided to go to the gallery of the State House to see the debate on the Equal Rights Amendment. Rather inexplicably, given its brief text, the ERA had unleashed a firestorm of opposition. When the amendment was debated here in South Carolina, a conservative activist from Illinois named Phyllis Schlafly flew to Columbia to make the case against ratification. Now, Miss Schlafly was an interesting woman. Although she possessed a law degree, she embraced traditional views of womanhood, positing that women should stay out of the workplace and remain at home, even though she herself was never at home, always flying about the country protesting equal rights for women. She argued that under the ERA, women would be drafted into combat. Divorced women would be penniless because husbands would no longer be required to support them. And heaven forbid, we might become like France and have unisex bathrooms. A young lawyer legislator from Columbia named Jean Hafer-Toll was selected to debate Miss Schlafly, and I must say she more than held her own. A champion debater in both high school and college, Jean Toll changed the focus of the debate away from the specter of co-ed bathrooms and the other parade of silly horribles to what the amendment really was designed to achieve: equal pay for equal work. She certainly convinced me, and apparently she convinced the South Carolina House of Representatives, because it ratified the amendment by a vote of 83-0. However, the South Carolina Senate rejected ratification, and ultimately the amendment was not only defeated here in South Carolina, but failed narrowly to garner the necessary states for ratification. I came away from the evening with more than just an appreciation for Jean Toll's debating skills. I had a glimpse of my own future, although I didn't realize it at the time. Never in my wildest dreams could I have imagined that Jean Toll and I would be elected on the same day to lead the two highest courts of this state, or that I would serve with her as my Chief Justice on the Supreme Court. But that's exactly what happened. I had another experience during my last year of law school that helped point me in the direction of the bench. I received a letter from a Supreme Court Justice, J.B. Bubba Ness from Bamberg, inviting me to interview for the position of his law clerk. Now, this man was the stuff law school legends were made of. He was a man who was small in stature, but who had a commanding presence, very much large and in charge. He was a Supreme Court justice who liked to refer to himself as an SOB, or sweet old Bubba. Now, I had never met a Supreme Court justice, much less one named Bubba, and it never entered my mind not to accept his invitation to interview, even though I had already accepted a permanent position with the firm I had clerked for during law school. When I walked into his office at the Supreme Court, the first words out of his mouth were, "Well, Miss Gorenflo, I have a lot of problems with you." Now, I was taken aback by that, because after all, he had invited me to interview with him for a position I hadn't even applied for. Sweet old Bubba then explained himself by saying, "First of all, you're a girl." Without thinking, I quickly replied, well, sir, you'll have to talk to God about that." Sweet old Bubba laughed out loud, and at that moment, our relationship was sealed. He offered me the job, and I accepted on the spot. Justice Ness became my teacher, my mentor, and my trusted friend. He encouraged my husband and I to adopt our beloved daughter, Kathleen, who graduated from the Charleston School of Law in 2014 and now practices with my husband. Justice Ness instilled in me a love of family and a love for the rule of law. Without question, it was because of my work with him that I decided to try and become a judge myself. After 2 years in Bamberg as Justice Ness's law clerk, I came to Horry County to work for a litigation firm called Stevens & Thomas. It was a time when many firms considered hiring a woman, but not many wanted that woman to meet with clients or actually go into the courtroom. Fortunately for me, mine was not that kind of firm. I later discovered that the senior partner, former State Senator James P. Stevens, had been one of 2 senators who in the early 70s had offered to employ a woman as his page. A very bold move. When the 2 young women went to the State House to fill out their paperwork, they were told by the clerk of the Senate that the Senate doesn't hire girls. Now, the students, who had just finished a class in constitutional law, explained to the clerk they were sure the South Carolina Senate wouldn't want to violate their constitutional rights by discriminating against them. But the clerk of the Senate allegedly patted one of the young women on her head and said, "So sue me." And that's exactly what they did. It took several years for their case to work its way up to the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, where they won the right for women to serve as pages in the South Carolina State House. Too late for them, but not too late for the many women that would follow them. And guess who the lawyer was who represented those two brave young women? None other than Jean Hafer Toll, with assistance from Ruth Bader Ginsburg. My own reception as a young woman lawyer in the 70s and early 80s really wasn't too bad. It was certainly much better than that experienced by Sandra Day O'Connor when she graduated third in her class from Stanford in 1952. William Rehnquist, who would later become her Chief Justice and a beloved friend, graduated first in that same class and had numerous job opportunities available to him. O'Connor, however, couldn't find a job with any firm in California after graduation. In fact, the firms that recruited from Stanford refused to even interview her. Only one law firm made her any offer at all, and that was as a legal secretary. Ironically, the senior partner of that firm was William French Smith, the same man who years later, as President Reagan's Attorney General, helped guide O'Connor's nomination to the Supreme Court. She turned down the offer to be a legal secretary and instead took an unpaid position as the Deputy Attorney General of San Mateo County. She later continued her public service in her home state of Arizona, and the rest is history. The day that President Reagan nominated her to the United States Supreme Court was one of the most exciting days in my life. In 1981, a year after her appointment to the Supreme Court, Justice O'Connor authored the opinion in Mississippi University for Women versus Hogan, holding that a nursing school could not constitutionally exclude men. Leave it to a woman who dealt with the ugly face of discrimination to understand that the rule of equality works both ways. I left the firm, which had become Stevens Thomas Hearn & Hearn, in 1986 when I was elected to the family court bench, becoming the third woman state court judge in South Carolina's history. After 9 rewarding years on the family court bench, I ran successfully for the Court of Appeals in 1995 and became its first woman chief judge in 1999. On the very same day, Jean Toll was elected South Carolina's first woman chief justice. 10 years later, in 2009, I was elected to the Supreme Court, providing Chief Justice Toll with the sister she had been waiting on for 20 years. Now that she is retired, the court is back to having only one woman. I am now in my 11th year on the Supreme Court and my 34th year as a judge. And I've come full circle because I'm back in that very same office I walked into in 1977 when I interviewed with Justice Ness for the job I almost didn't get because I was a girl. The face of the South Carolina judiciary has changed dramatically since I went on the bench in 1986. As I said, I joined only 2 other women. All 3 of us were family court judges at that time. Today, there are 44 women state court judges out of a total of 122, which represents 36% of the judiciary. 28 of 60 family court judges, 12 of 48 circuit court judges, 3 of 9 Court of Appeals judges, and 1 of 5 justices on the Supreme Court. The percentage goes up to over 40% when you add in the probate judges, more than half of whom are female. And this same type of trend continues in state court judiciaries across the country. So why is it important to have women on the bench? I think we can all agree that courts need to be representative of the society they serve, and without question, gender, and racial diversity on the bench promotes the public's perception of fairness. Whether or not women actually rule differently than men on the vast majority of issues before them has never been empirically established. And after spending the last 25 years on appellate courts with mostly male members, I tend to agree with the sentiment that at the end of the day, a wise woman and a wise man will likely come to the same conclusion. Yet we cannot lose sight of the fact that all judges are human beings who are greatly influenced by our backgrounds, communities, and experience. Culturally, biologically, socially, and historically, women have different experiences than men, and we bring those experiences with us to the bench. There may yet be another reason to hope that the numbers of women on courts increase. As the former Chief Justice of Canada, Beverley McLachlin, has noted, women's presence on courts may result in happier courts. According to her, once 4 of the 9 members of Canada's Supreme Court were women, they had nicer pictures on the wall, better food in their dining room, a cake for every judge's birthday, and yoga. There has been a lot of change for good in the lives of both women and men since 1920, when women received the right to vote. Women have made tremendous advances in every profession, none more remarkable than in the law, particularly when you consider our history before the bar. In 1875, the Wisconsin Supreme Court denied a woman admission to the state bar and stated that nature has tempered woman as little for the juridical conflicts of the courtroom as for the physical conflicts of the battlefields. Womanhood is molded for gentler and better things. In 1968, I graduated from high school, and Jean Toll graduated from college. There were no women state court judges in South Carolina, and none on the U.S. Supreme Court. Heck, women couldn't even serve on juries in South Carolina until 1968. And we know that South Carolina didn't want to give women the right to vote until 1969. Yet in the span of my professional life, women now comprise 36% of the South Carolina bar and 36% of its state court judges. Jean Toll has served as Chief Justice of the South Carolina Supreme Court, and I joined her there. When I went on the bench in 1986, people said to me over and over again, "You don't look like a judge." But now I do. Perhaps the Wisconsin Supreme Court of 1875 was at least partially right, and women are molded for better things, including being judges and justices, cabinet members, and hopefully, in my lifetime, President of the United States. So do we still need to celebrate the ratification of the 19th Amendment, Women's Equality Day, and continue to work for equality under the Constitution? My response is absolutely. I realize that some, perhaps even some young women, may not think the ERA is necessary. Perhaps it seems irrelevant to them because they've grown up with a sense of equality. For them, equal rights is like fluoride. It's just in the water. But we cannot rest on the laurels of the suffragettes, the Bella Abzugs, and the Gloria Steinems, because the work they began is not yet finished. Since the early 70s, when Congress passed Women's Equality Day, and I had a button with the numerals 59 pinned on me, women are still not equal where it counts the most, in the workplace. As we celebrate the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment and the 49th anniversary of Women's Equality Day, women, on the average, earn 80 cents for every dollar earned by men. And I'm only speaking of white women. Our black and brown sisters earn considerably less, 61 cents and 53 cents, respectively. So are things better? You bet they are. Are they good enough? No. And so for all of us, our daughters and our sons, we should continue to strive to achieve what Susan B. Anthony envisioned well over 100 years ago when she said, "Men, their rights and nothing more. Women, their rights and nothing less." Thank you so much for letting me be with you today. Stay safe and God bless.
Thank you to Justice Hearn, and thank you for being here today. I just am so excited that she was able to present this video to us. 1848, remember the Seneca Falls Convention. And in 1851, there was a women's rights convention in Akron, Ohio. And just bear with me while I read you just a little bit of what Sojourner Truth said. And she was talking about equality. Sojourner Truth was a former slave. And Susan B. Anthony, all of these names that Justice Hearn mentioned, if you don't know them or if you just heard about them in passing, I encourage you to read about these strong females, including Justice Hearn and Chief Justice Jean Hafer Toll. And Sojourner Truth said, "That man over there says that women need to be helped into carriages and lifted over ditches and to have the best place everywhere. Nobody ever helps me into carriages. Am I not a woman? Look at me, look at my arm. I've plowed and planted and gathered into barns, and no man could head me. And am I not a woman? I can bear the lash as well as any man. I have borne 13 children. I have been sold off, and most of them have been sold off to slavery. And when I cried out with my mother's grief, none but Jesus heard me. Am I not a woman?" And she was pointing out what the other females said earlier and later, that we are equal. Females are equal with males. And until we recognize that and continue to work for it, we won't see any great change. I noted that Justice Hearn said that she was a cheerleader. I was a cheerleader too. And that was a great way for me to get out and meet people and also become involved in my middle school, my high school, college, undergraduate school at College of Charleston, and the University of South Carolina School of Law, and getting involved. And that's what it will take. The 19th Amendment enacted in 1920. So what does that mean? That means that we need to get out and vote. That means that we need to run for office. And when you do that, you will see great change. We can complain a great deal, but complaints won't help if we're not willing to be a part of the solution. So we must continue this fight for equality. Started a long time ago, finally recognized the female's right to vote in 1920 with the 19th Amendment. And it's important. It's important for females to be bold, to be strong, to stand up, and to speak out. And for males to join us in that. A while ago, people were thinking, oh, only a female can be a feminist. Males can be feminists too, because being a feminist means that you believe in this equality. Thank you everyone for being a part of Law Day 2020 and the celebration of female equality in the 19th Amendment. I hope you have a great weekend, and I hope you stay safe. I hope you stay healthy. And even though you may not be able to get really close to people outside of your family, stay in touch. Write those letters, handwrite those letters, do all of those things that you were thinking about doing in connecting with people. And we can see some great change. I am hopeful, I'm optimistic that equality will be ours. We will see a president, a female president of the United States. And the majority of our politicians will be females. A majority of our judges will be females. We can do that. Thank you, everyone. Have a great weekend. Thank you, David. Thank you, Kim.
Thank you. Deborah, thank you. And I do want to just give a shout out to Charleston County Bar Association's Inclusion and Diversity Committee, which Deborah has worked with to get this program going, as well assistance from the CLE Committee of the Charleston County Bar Association. So we couldn't have done that without these committees, and thank you very much for that. And thank you all for attending. Have a good day. Stay safe.
Thank you.